Suddenly, the ruins of the house were gone. In their place stood the estate as it had once been, whole and intact. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the grand front doors stood wide open, inviting her in. But this wasn't a simple vision. Caroline could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, its malevolent presence stronger than ever. This was the house as it had been in its prime, a perfect, beautiful facade hiding the darkness within. A chill ran down her spine as she realized what was happening. The house had never been truly destroyed. It was still here, waiting for her. And now, it wanted her to come back. Caroline hesitated at the threshold of the house, the sense of dread growing stronger with each passing second. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and rot, as if the very walls were decomposing from within. She could hear the faint whisper of voices, echoes of the past, and the soft creak of floorboards beneath unseen feet. She stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The house groaned in response, its walls shifting as if alive. Caroline's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to keep moving. She knew what she was looking for now. The entity that had haunted the house, the force behind the skeleton key and the rituals, it was somewhere deep within these walls. And it wanted her. As Caroline made her way through the winding halls, the house seemed to shift around her. The walls warped and twisted, and doors that had once led to familiar rooms now opened into strange, unfamiliar spaces. It was as if the house itself was a living, breathing entity, constantly changing to confuse and disorient her. But Caroline refused to be deterred. She pressed on, following the pull of the dark energy that thrummed beneath her skin. At last, she found herself standing before a door at the end of a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The wood was blackened and charred, as if it had been burned in some terrible fire, and strange symbols had been carved into its surface. She knew this was it. Whatever lay beyond this door was the source of the evil that had plagued the house for so long. The entity that had been unleashed when the key was used. Taking a deep breath, Caroline pushed open the door. Inside, the room was vast and empty, save for a single figure standing in the center. The figure was tall and cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by a swirling mass of shadow. But even in its obscured form, Caroline could feel the sheer power radiating from it. This was the dark entity that had been tied to the house. The force that had been controlling everything. The figure turned toward her, and though its face was hidden, Caroline could feel its gaze burning into her. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the room, filling her mind with a sense of dread. "You have come," it said, "as I knew you would." Caroline's hands trembled, but she refused to back down. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The figure seemed to smile, though its face remained hidden. "I am the keeper of the key, the force that binds this house, and all who enter it. You have unlocked the door, Caroline. Now you must face the consequences." Caroline's mind raced as she tried to process the entity's words. The keeper of the key, the force that had been controlling the house, the spirits, and even Violet, was standing before her. And now it wanted her to pay the price for unlocking its power. "You've been controlling everything," Caroline said, her voice shaking with anger. "The house, the key, the rituals, you've been manipulating all of it." The entity chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent chills down Caroline's spine. "The house is mine. It has always been mine. And now, so are you." Caroline's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she couldn't face this entity on its terms. It was far too powerful, its influence stretching back generations. But the key, though shattered, had given her a glimpse of its power. If she could tap into that, maybe she could stand a chance. The entity moved closer, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. "There is no escape, Caroline. The house has claimed you, just as it claimed those before you." But Caroline wasn't ready to give up. She reached deep within herself, focusing on the fragments of the skeleton key buried beneath the rubble. The key had unlocked the power of the house, but it had also given her control, however limited, over that power. She closed her eyes and whispered the incantation she had found in the voodoo book, her voice trembling but determined. The air around her shimmered, and the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The entity hissed in anger, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. "You dare to challenge me?" Caroline's eyes snapped open, and she raised her hand, summoning the power of the key. A blinding light erupted from her palm, illuminating the room and forcing the entity to recoil. "I'm not afraid of you," Caroline said, her voice strong. "You don't control me," the entity roared in fury, its form stretching and twisting as it tried to fight against the light. But Caroline held her ground, the power of the key surging through her. The light grew brighter, and the shadows that clung to the entity began to peel away, revealing its true form. Beneath the darkness, the figure was little more than a twisted, skeletal creature, its bones blackened and charred. Its hollow eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. "You cannot defeat me," it growled, its voice echoing through the chamber. "I am eternal. I am the darkness that binds this house." Caroline's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She could feel the power of the key growing stronger with each passing second, the energy coursing through her veins like fire. She knew she couldn't defeat the entity with brute force alone, but maybe, just maybe, she could outsmart it. As the entity lunged toward her, Caroline focused all her energy on the skeleton key. She had only scratched the surface of its power before, but now she could feel it fully awakening within her. The key wasn't just a tool for unlocking doors, it was a conduit, a link between this world and the next. The entity recoiled as Caroline raised her hand, the light from the key blazing brighter than ever. "You don't understand," Caroline said, her voice steady. "The key doesn't belong to you. It never did. It belongs to those who have the strength to wield it." The entity snarled, its skeletal form trembling with rage. "You are nothing, a mere mortal, bound by the limitations of your flesh. You cannot wield the key's power." But Caroline wasn't listening. She could feel the key's power pulsing through her, flooding every cell in her body. It was like fire and ice at the same time, overwhelming in its intensity but somehow familiar, as if it had always been a part of her. She realized then that the skeleton key wasn't just an object, it was a force tied to the very fabric of life and death, something far older than the house or the entity before her. The light from the key spread outward, creating a glowing barrier between Caroline and the dark entity. It hissed and shrieked, recoiling from the brightness, but Caroline could see that it was weakening. The skeletal form that had once seemed invincible was now trembling, its bones cracking under the strain. "I will destroy you," the entity screamed, lunging forward again, this time with more desperation than strength. Caroline felt a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't afraid anymore. The key's power wasn't something to fear, but something to understand and harness. The house had been built around this power, and those who had lived and died within its walls had been drawn into its darkness. But that darkness didn't own the key. The key was a choice. "You can't," Caroline whispered, her voice steady, "because I choose not to let you." With that, she raised her hand higher, focusing all her energy on the fragments of the skeleton key and the ancient power it contained. The light grew even brighter, filling the entire room, and the entity shrieked in agony as its form began to disintegrate. "No, you cannot banish me," it roared, but its voice was growing weaker, fading into the howling winds that now whipped through the room. Caroline stepped forward, her eyes locked on the creature. "I can, and I will." The entity let out one final, tortured scream as its body dissolved into ash, the dark energy that had once filled the house now scattered to the winds. The air around her began to clear, and the oppressive weight that had haunted the estate for so long lifted, as if the house itself had been freed from its own curse. As the last remnants of the entity faded into nothingness, the house groaned once more, but this time it was different. The walls, which had been warped and twisted by the dark forces that had inhabited them, seemed to relax, as if the house was finally letting go of the malevolent presence that had controlled it for so long. Caroline stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, her heart pounding in her chest. The light from the skeleton key still glowed softly in her hand, but it was no longer the blinding, overpowering force it had been moments before. Instead, it was calm, almost peaceful. She looked around, half expecting the house to collapse completely, but instead, there was only silence. The dark entity was gone, and with it, the curse that had plagued the estate. For a long moment, Caroline simply stood there, letting the stillness wash over her. She had won. She had faced the darkness and survived. But she also knew that this wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for all the souls who had been trapped in the house's grip for so long. The whispers were gone, the shadows no longer lurked in the corners of her vision. The house was just a house now, its power broken. But Caroline knew she couldn't stay. As she made her way back through the halls, the house felt different, quieter, almost serene. The floorboards didn't creak ominously beneath her feet, and the air was no longer thick with the scent of decay. It was as though the house itself was grateful, relieved to be free from the darkness that had consumed it for so long. When she reached the front door, she paused, looking back one last time. The house had been a place of nightmares, but it had also revealed something about herself, about her strength, her will to survive, and her ability to confront the unknown. She took a deep breath and stepped outside. The sun had risen fully now, bathing the estate in warm, golden light. The ruins of the house still stood behind her, but they no longer felt threatening. Instead, they seemed like a relic of the past, a monument to the darkness that had once thrived there but was now gone. Caroline walked slowly toward the edge of the property, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. She had come to this house expecting to care for an elderly woman, but she had been drawn into something much darker, a battle between life, death, and the forces that existed in between. She had won, but the cost had been high. Violet was gone, lost to the madness of her own ambitions. The spirits of the house, though freed, had left their mark on her. Caroline knew she would never forget the faces she had seen, the whispers she had heard, or the weight of the key in her hand. As she reached the gate, she stopped and looked down at the skeleton key. It was still glowing faintly, a reminder of the power it held. But that power was no longer a threat. The key had done its job. It had unlocked the door, not just to the house, but to the truth of what lay within. Caroline knew what she had to do. She knelt down and placed the key in the dirt, burying it deep beneath the earth. The key had caused enough pain, enough suffering. It didn't belong in the hands of the living anymore. It belonged to the past, to the house and the souls it had claimed. As she stood up, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. The key was gone, buried along with the secrets of the house. And with it, the darkness that had haunted her was gone too. Caroline turned and walked away from the estate, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. Months passed, and the estate remained untouched, its ruins slowly overtaken by nature. The trees grew taller, their branches stretching out over the crumbled remains of the house, and wildflowers bloomed where the once imposing structure had stood. Caroline had moved on with her life, though the memories of the house still lingered in the back of her mind. She had faced the darkness and survived, but the experience had changed her. She no longer feared the unknown, no longer felt the weight of the shadows that had once followed her. But every now and then, in the quiet moments just before sleep, she would hear the faintest whisper on the wind, a reminder of the house, the key, and the battle she had fought. And she would smile, knowing that the darkness was gone, but its lessons would stay with her forever. The house had been defeated, but the power of the skeleton key was eternal. And though it was buried, its story was far from over. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed.